Okay, this is an unadulterated marketing video. I was first mesmerized by the product SketchUp when I heard their marketing line. Your high scores on solitaire will need to go unchallenged for a while. But it wasn't until I discovered a little program called Sketchy Physics, which a certain 007 agent likes to call funky physics. It wasn't until I discovered Sketchy Physics that I was completely mesmerized. And it wasn't until I discovered something in a blog where a guy with Hodgkin's disease was kind of apologized for not getting his updates to Sketchy Physics done that I was completely mesmerized. And I'll link people to those documents. But instead of looking at those documents, I'm just going to go through right now how to do a real quick mechanism in Sketchy Physics, not using an input from AutoCAD, which I would suggest for most students to draft things flat in AutoCAD and then bring them into 3D in SketchUp. So I'm going to do that by making a basic mechanism here, and I'll try to expose you to the tools here. One thing you definitely want to do if you start SketchUp is get the large tool set up. Turn that off, and then view, toolbars, large tool set. Get going with that, and I've got the Sketchy Physics tools around, and so I'm going to very often go to standard views and go to a top view. You notice here that camera, you've got perspective, you've got parallel projection, camera, perspective, and so you can kind of just learn to kind of play around with the mouse. I really recommend that people do this early and often. There are two ways to make round things. I would suggest that if you're just playing around Sketchy Physics, you can play around with actually making the 3D object. I'm pulling that out and pulling it up. And that becomes something now that if I go ahead and turn on gravity, it falls away. I'm going to point out that I'm using Sketchy Physics 3X, the experimental version, which really is the way it's heading. It's been a while since it's been updated, but with a new Google SketchUp 8, we expect some inputs or changes to that. So we've got that there. That actually is something called it's a group in SketchUp, and it means if we go into the group here, if we go inside that group now and go and actually add a hinge, right? So what I've done is I've gone double-clicked inside the group, and I'm gone to the edge there. I'm going to kind of take that up in the blue direction, and I close it now. Now that hinge is attached to that thing. Well, I can now, because I went inside the block to put the hinge is attached to the thing and it falls away with it. If I do not go inside the block and I instead go to motor and kind of click in the center here, once again kind of letting it find the blue direction, which in most 3D drafting is the Z direction. Red, which is your index finger, goes down the X. Z, which is the Y. Z direction is your thumb, and your Y direction becomes your kinked expressive finger. I now have things that if they're not attached, you see that just falls away. I'm going to go back here. Now I'm going to click on the attach, which is right there next to the UI. I'm going to hold the control key on a Windows computer, and I think it's the Alt key on an Apple computer. I'm going to grab one and then the other, and then I hit the kind of space bar or the click, once again pointing out the space bar. Now when I turn that on, I see that the motor is turning around and you've got a kind of an input here, which later on we're going to attach up to some math or to a Xbox controller. I go back, I keep on hitting here and going back. This is the Sketchy Physics toolbar here. So now I've got, and you notice one's a motor, one is a hinge, but the hinge is attached inside what's called a group. So instead now I can go ahead and make something. I'll just kind of go ahead and draft it up here. That's kind of hard. I'm going to take that and draft it across it, push it up. And we're just kind of clinking around. I'm going to point out, like in Inventor, you're much better off drafting these things in 2D. I'm left clicking. We grab our thing in SketchUp. We grab the tool. I come across here. I'm going to kind of put it relatively close by. Now I'm going to go underneath. I'm not explaining what I'm doing with the mouse. I would really expect that you try to do this intuitively and come to me for some pointers. I'll go back to the pointers, but I'm really trying to turn people on into never being bored in class and never playing solitaire again. Once again, I'm underneath here. You remember that hinge is attached to this object because I clicked down into what's called a group. Now I'm going to click on the attach, hold the control key, grab the joint, and then continue to hold on the control key, grab the slab, if you would. I just finished up by hitting a space bar, clicking, and now once again when I turn on sketchy physics, you're going to see it's going to pull that thing around. It's going to have all kinds of swinging going on. You can turn the motor on. Now I'm going to tell you there's improvements to this over time, but very often, like in a lot of programs, you just figure out how things go. I've wasted a lot of time. I've figured out now that if I double click within a group and then go ahead and put in another, I'll put in a motor this time. That's a motor. I'll put a motor rear here at the top, going up. Now once again, if I take and draft another piece of, I guess I'm going to call that a slab. Let's try it again here. I'm clicking here. And then giving it some height. And then going ahead and moving. I'm left clicking, selecting the tool, M for move in SketchUp, left click, taking it out, and then once again selecting by spacebar or clearing my palette, as I like to say. I'm going to grab the connect tool, hold the control on a Windows machine, grab that one there, and you got to just try to grab. Very often you're not going to be able to grab exactly what you want. I'm going to hold the control key and grab just the joint and then just the thing that it's attached to, spacebar or click out here, click back the select tool, and now turn it on. And this time you should see two motors, which means the second one can be turned going faster or slower. So I've turned the second motor faster. I can actually turn the first motor off. And you see, because of conservation of momentum, even though the first motor is off, it's still spinning free, and then once again we can turn the motor back on. And you kind of have this sense of what you can do with linkages and mechanisms. And you'll see later on, you could think of this, looking at it as, I don't know, tilt-a-whirl math. You could think of it as roller coaster math. You can think of it as figure skater math or gymnast math or machine math or roller math. But as you get linkages involved, the mathematics is not that tough, really. As you can see, the drafting was not. But it's a question of just kind of linking it and dovetailing it from one thing to the other. So there's a lot you can do with sketchy physics in terms of modeling, simple modeling systems. Eventually you get to something like that where it's just completely tweaking out. So I'm going to turn off the motors and see if I can stop the thing and have it not explode. Realistically, you see there, it's kind of gone out of whack, and our model has reached the mathematical problem, the end of what the math is possible. So I'm going to hit stop there and then start again. Stop and go back. This time I'm going to start it and then slow everything down. And you're going to see that SketchUp and or Inventor are these tools that are going to really be made more approachable if you start kind of using the concepts of sines and cosines and rotation. The term used to be, and I'll point it out from a book called The Great Bridge, was 3D kind of kinematics or 3D spatial geometry. And it is something now that is greatly enabled by the use of tools like Geometer Sketchpad, like a newly GeoAlgebra, which I found today, which things like Inventor, SketchUp, Sketchy Physics, things like comsol that runs on SolidWorks. I've got at least one student who's worked some SolidWorks in the past. So you're going to see that these tools that are out there is one of the reasons I really promote people who have a laptop. You may not want to get some of these other programs, but definitely get SketchUp on there, and then Sketchy Physics. Thanks for listening. I will provide some learning opportunities inside and outside of class for people who want to start using this engine, particularly with starting in some base AutoCAD work and bringing it into SketchUp, which is possible on the campus computers. The campus computers do not have the latest version of SketchUp nor Sketchy Physics, so I really recommend if you really get going deep into this that you use your personal laptop or talk to me about getting some upgrades to some of the computers on campus. Thanks for listening.